So what's your premise right now? If you're back running the Nets, what would you do with this team?
Well, I think the first thing I would figure out what I'm doing at head coach, right? I mean, I would just give it to Jacque Vaughn and let it like play out, and see where this team is in the off season, and if you got to go in a different direction because you've gutted it and you're going like the Will Hardy route in Utah, one of these younger coaches. Um, that's why I'm a little bit, take all the everything else with Ime going on, like why I'm like, well, why are you going to throw? And he's a good coach. Why are you going to throw up a Hail Mary? And a year from now, he might not be your guy, right? Like that's kind of like I feel like it's a shotgun marriage. So I think for me, I mean, it's been 4 games. Hey, they're competing, right? I guess you could say they're playing hard for Jacque Vaughn. I would probably just leave it there. And I think the second thing is, and you got to figure out what you're doing with Kyrie, right? Like you're either in, you're out, like for both sides here. And like this suspension is going to be up by the weekend. They're going out west. Is he going to be on the court? Has he hit the checklist, the 6-point checklist, whatever that is? And if he's not, he's going to be a free agent. Send him home, right? Like just send him home and just ride out what you got right now. And if the Durant situation explodes, then you deal with it from there. But I think those are probably your 2 big things here. They're not going to be, kind of where Milwaukee is or Cleveland. And then Simmons, like what is going on? Like the Ben Simmons thing. And I said it in the offseason, like the how this team goes is based on Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, and Seth Curry, guys who, were coming off either in off-season surgeries here. Like, I mean, we're going to get just 20 minutes of Ben Simmons every night and 3 points and 4 rebounds and 2 assists here. And, so like there's a lot to kind of unpack there. But I do think you'll get to a point when, you're 4-7 going into the New York game. You could be 4-8. You go out west. You could be, I don't know, 5-12, 5-13. So where, eventually you're going to have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off here.
I just wonder if it's worth even going through the rest of the season. And normally I wouldn't even ask that question. I'd go, hey, you still have a chance with this kind of talent. Let's see what happens. But Simmons isn't even close to being what he was when he was still a pretty flawed player. And they benched him at the end of the Dallas game. Like that Dallas game, I even touch on it that Dallas game was so frustrating for me watching Simmons actually not be the guy guarding Luka. And KD, you're asking KD to be the initial defender. Granted, there were switches where they got, reassigned to the whole thing, but the assignment defensively, they didn't want to put Simmons on him. We saw a lot of the same stuff against Giannis. You're like, look, if you're not around as a guy at this body type to at least try to get in the way, nobody's stopping these guys, then what are you doing here? And then Jacque didn't even go back to him because they wanted the spacing, which Nick Claxton even recently had just mentioned. I mean, his own teammate was like, yeah, when he's not out there, it's a lot easier for me, which I thought was pretty revealing and rare.
Well, yeah, I mean, you saw it in Washington on Friday, and then you saw it at the end of Charlotte, right? Like even in the Dallas home game, the game they lost in overtime, like you can't like everything is downhill. Like Ben Simmons is almost like watching him as like a defensive back was given a 15-yard cushion, right? Like it's just, and that's kind of. Yeah, I mean, from an offensive standpoint, we can go down the list of his flaws, but at least defensively, like steals, rebounds, get out and go, and it's almost like a detriment to it's a $35 million detriment that you got for 2 more years. Like we could blow this all up, and Kyrie can go somewhere, and Durant, maybe you trade or stuff, but you're still gonna have Simmons there. Like I don't see the value for him. All of a sudden, like the San Antonio, like take a flyer and on what he's got left, or teams like that. I just don't see it right now, and that's another thing. As I said, like you got to like the Simmons thing is a big thing that nobody's really talking about because he hadn't played until that Dallas game.
Yeah, because you owe the picks on the Harden deal, like it just makes it so much more complicated for them. And, there's a big difference between saying, oh, all right, let's blow it up now.
Yeah.
Okay. We're not going to be good. We'll be 10 games under 500. All right, everybody get to work. And it's not realistic to say, okay, give me your best offers around the league by the end of the day, wanting to do something and then doing something that makes sense. But they are really, really stuck. They're stuck in a way that's different than other teams. And I don't know if getting ahead of it is the right call. I don't know that it would necessarily be deemed impatient because they've been patient about certain things. But now, if you, in theory, have all three guys coming back for a long stretch, Harris will look better eventually. Is there enough there to hold on to? But then at the same time, if you try to ride this out, are you going to be left getting nothing back for guys that are going to get mad again at some point and want out as bad as it's been?
Well, and then the other thing, Ryan, is like, when is the 15-game Durant injury coming? Yeah. Right? Like it's like there's a track record there that there's going to be a lump of games that he is going to probably miss here. Maybe he doesn't. I mean, but the wear and tear of his, 37, 38 minutes is going to take a toll on him. And yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say, you don't have to draft picks, to blow it up here. It might be another front office that's going to be, building this roster back together here. I mean, I went through it in post Boston stuff where we hung on for dear life trying to salvage something, and we hired Lionel Hollins because we thought it was like that veteran coach that can kind of that Hail Mary type approach there. And I just look at it this year like this is has a chance to be a really good draft. You're not going to get the number one pick because Houston has the right to swap with you. You could get a high pick, with what you already have by basically, if this thing bottoms out here, you could have the third pick in the draft. You could have the second pick in the draft. Who knows what happens in the lottery? Maybe be 8 or 9 here. But I think eventually that, you're going to have to let go of, I said, like the ghosts of the trades from the past. Like eventually, like you can't worry about what you owe Houston for the health of the organization. And you're just going to have to, to move forward here.
You mentioned the Lionel Hollins hiring. I want to stay on that and kind of just, if there's any stories about, the baseball thing used to be like when you bring in a tough guy, the next guy has to be pro player. And then if he's too soft, you need a baseball manager that gets on these guys' asses. And it's, feels a little bit like guesswork. I think the Kenny Atkinson, Steve Nash has an interesting parallel to that. That's why I don't have really any sympathy for the players. It's like Nash was the guy you actually, in theory, wanted instead of Ketty. Then you got him. You couldn't handle that. I don't know what's going on with the Ime thing. There was people last week around the league were like, hey, they're hammering out the final parts of this contract here, and then it doesn't happen. What is it? Is it guesswork? Is it the interview convincing you? Is it input? Like, what is that moment like when you're trying to figure out, not necessarily the X and O's guy, the personality guy that's the right fit to get a little extra out of a lineup that maybe is disappointing?
I think it's, for that process, it was so reactionary for us because we had Jason, the Jason Kidd situation was, Jason didn't want to be there. He wanted to go to Milwaukee. We traded him for 2 second-round picks, right? And now you've got like.
By the way, can I jump in there? What's that like? I mean, the players get upset. What's it like when the coach goes, you know what, I'm out of here?
Well, it's funny. I that was in 2014. I look back on that because there were so many different there were so many different tipping points, and we were just the practice facility, like we were doing like a grand opening of like the build out, right? And I remember like seeing Jason like in a corner by himself. I'm thinking like, oh, he didn't really want to be a part of this. And then the night of the draft and all that stuff, but it, like you could tell like it had soured, and there was already some type of relationship with Milwaukee. So there was some back channeling, I guess you could say, and it was one of those first for me where you get on a conference call with the NBA on a trade of a coach and you're getting 2 second-round picks back. But it was so reactionary because we're holding on for dear life of that trade. And, we, at the end of the day, we rushed, right? Like Lionel was coming off, I guess a few years back with that Memphis team. with Zach and Tony Allen, those hard nosed, basically squeezed everything out of it. And you're thinking like, yeah, this guy, we brought him in, we put him on the board. He showed us what he could do with this roster, and you kind of bought in. And he's a good coach, but you almost needed kind of like a softer player development guy, because eventually you were going to have to rip that roster apart. Like Darren and Joe and Garnett was still there, Brooke was still there. So you thought that he could fit with that, but it just didn't work. Where the year before, we went through, when Jason Kidd got hired, like we went through a pretty thorough process of interviewing coaches. And then one day, like Billy came in, he goes, yeah, I think Jason Kidd's our guy. And I'm like, well, didn't he just stop playing like 2 weeks ago? Like what happened here? So that's why you see these teams now, man, they bring in like 25, 30 guys, because they're just, you're going through the thorough process. A lot of it is you're trying to get information that other teams do. Like that's like, Utah brings in a lot of guys because you're trying to like steal like what other teams are doing here. But, in that case in Brooklyn, that was a rushed decision.